Good afternoon, everyone. Today, the last day of our week of diplomacy, and we are going to discuss about the BRICS expansion of the organization. This year, the association will include 6 new members. On the one hand, it's a great opportunity to increase the economic level of the organization. On the other hand, it is a really difficult challenge for all countries in the BRICS, especially for Brazil. Now, professor of political science at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, coordinator of scientific research at the BRICS Political Center, member of the Vladai Club, Fabiano Mельничук, will lecture at a crossroads, Brazil in the phase of BRICS expansion. Professor Fabiano Mельничук, are you here, us and see?
Yes, I can hear you and I can see you, and thank you very much for your kind words in your introduction. Okay, so Dobry dzień. Very good afternoon for you there in Samara, Russia. I'm speaking from southern Brazil. It's a 6-hour time difference in terms. So we're in the morning. You're going to see this shining sun behind me, and I'd like to address the issue of the Brazil in the face of BRICS expansion. And this presentation is based on a contribution to the Valdai Club discussion that's going to be published soon, I guess, in their website. So I'm going to present based on the text that I had recently written. If you have any doubts, or if you have any technical issues, or if you have any problems with my English, the way I pronounce words, Brazilians, we have this nasal sound, which is very different from Russians and from Americans. So if you find it difficult, please just let me know, ask me to change the accent or to speak in a different way, okay? But please don't ask me to deliver this presentation in Russian, потому что я изучаю русский, но я не говорить по-русски. Я понимаю чуть-чуть, да? Well, so during the South Africa summit held in 2023, you know that BRICS countries agreed to invite Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates to become new members this year, 2024. Although it was very welcomed by the foreign officers of the member countries as a demonstration of the group's strengthening, if we look this enlargement from the Brazilian perspective, the results were far from satisfying. And even depending on how harsh one is, the expansion can be seen as a Brazilian defeat or a defeat for Brazil. So my basic argument is that Brazil needs to reevaluate its strategy towards BRICS in general and towards the expansion process in particular, in order to continue to be a relevant actor in the multipolar world. So my view is that Brazil wanted to negotiate the enlargement in a certain way, and it did not happen. And it was, in my view, a problem that was caused by the way Brazil is facing BRICS now. And then I'm going to explain a bit about how Brazil thought about the expansion in the beginning of the group and how Brazil thinks about expansion now. And I'm going to be a very critical voice against the way Brazil is handling that process, because as a scholar that do research on BRICS for more than 10 years, I do believe that BRICS is the best alternative that Brazil have to contribute for the change in global order. So in 2010, Brazil supported South Africa's entry in BRICS. But analysts tend to consider that decision as motivated by interests of domestic politics, due to an attempt of President Lula da Silva to please the Brazilian Black movement. Moreover, at the international level, the inclusion of South Africa could facilitate Brazil's diplomacy due to the curious situation in which an informal group began to function within another, namely IPSA, formed a few years earlier by India, Brazil, and South Africa. Since then, Brazil had been cautious regarding the expansion of BRICS. The country feared that the dilution of power among new members could negatively affect its influence in the process of transforming the international governance structure. As it is well known, Brazil seeks a permanent seat at the Security Council as one of its strategic foreign policy goals, and does not want to have other competitors inside BRICS. The salutary caution from the beginning gave place to one of a different kind from 2022 onwards. It seems that the cautionary position on the expansion stems from Brazil's lack of clarity regarding the possible benefits that BRICS can offer. Russian actions in Ukraine and the increasing tensions between China and the USA brought discomfort to Brazil. In this context, Brazilian diplomacy interpreted the actions taken by the Chinese presidency of BRICS in 2022 as aimed at strengthening the pillar of political and security cooperation of the BRICS organization to the detriment of the others. In the same vein, the accelerated expansion of the group sponsored by Beijing was interpreted as a decision to meet the needs of the security interests of both China and Russia. This stance by Itamaraty, which is the Brazilian Foreign Office, seems to be out of line with Lula's presidential diplomacy, as he offered himself as a mediator in the conflict between Russia and the West, and quite explicitly supported the inclusion of new members in the BRICS. This misalignment between Itamaraty and the presidency crippled Brazil's capacity to assess the BRICS' importance and resulted in some inconsistencies that I'm going to present to you now. So you know that Lula da Silva is Brazil's president, don't you? You can say, like, you can just show me that you okay, so you're following my presentation. You're not sleeping yet. Okay, good. Very good. Good to know that we are together. So these are the inconsistencies. Lula da Silva has this political opinion that BRICS is important and that enlargement is important. But the Brazilian diplomacy is having second thoughts because of the transformations in the international order that we experienced from 2022 on. So what are the inconsistencies that I could check during this process of negotiating the BRICS enlargement from the Brazilian perspective? First, Brazil's long-dated support for the informal and flexible format of the group was put aside by the Brazilian insistence that the establishment of explicit criteria for the accession of new members should be achieved. In what could be seen as a Brazilian victory, if we look superficially, these criteria were defined in the guiding principles, standards, criteria, and procedures for expansion adopted in South Africa. So there's a document that the leaders of BRICS countries accepted last year, creating the rules for new members to become part of BRICS. Brazil supported three criteria for the entry of new members: the new members' commitment to the BRICS reform agenda, the participation in the G20, and the participation in the new development bank, which is the Bank of BRICS. An analysis of the document with the criteria clearly indicates that only the first proposal made by Brazil was covered, albeit in a very general way. There are no references to the G20 or to the new development bank in the document. Brazilian diplomacy would argue that despite not being incorporated in the guiding principles, the Brazilian proposal was accepted, at least partially, in practice. Of the 6 members invited, 2 belonged to the G20, Argentina and Saudi Arabia, and 2 to the new development bank, United Arab Emirates and Egypt. However, considering Argentina's refusal to join BRICS and the entry of Egypt and Ethiopia, which do not belong to any of these organizations, this positive assessment is attenuated. Brazil's insufficient outcome is even clearer when one considers that the definition of the formal criteria of entrance did not impose any limits to the number of future members after this first round of expansion. And Brazil wanted to limit that. That's why he proposed membership in other groupings, besides being a member of the BRICS. So this is what I consider a Brazilian defeat, or Brazil's defeat, during the negotiating process. But I think that this defeat is not surprising and reflects a certain disengagement on the part of Brazil with the BRICS. In fact, the drastic change in the direction of world politics from 2022 onwards has fueled an already well-known stance in Brazilian diplomacy that has been openly reproduced by diplomats occupying key positions in the BRICS negotiating process. I won't quote the names, I won't say who are these diplomats, but they are publicly portraying or purveying this view that BRICS might be not very good for Brazil nowadays. And they are in negotiating roles during the BRICS expansion. So according to these diplomats, IPSA, India, Brazil, and South Africa would better serve Brazil's interests, as it is a coalition where there would be no, and then I'm quoting a diplomat that I listened mentioning that expression, taboo issues, such as democracy, human rights, and gender. The fact that this idea disregards the way in which India has redefined its contemporary identity does not go unnoticed. So India is passing through a very important reformulation of its identity, and we cannot say that India is as aligned with these Western values as it used to be in the past. But Brazilian diplomacy seems to disregard that while mentioning this idea of taboo issues. The negative impact of such reading on the expanded BRICS is also not ignored, as the incorporation of Arab Muslim countries in the BRICS requires current members to take a more sensitive and generous look at intra-bloc differences. So originally, the idea of BRICS is that you had different countries that would respect their particularities, that would respect their own values, and would share the same interest of restructuring the international order. This was at the basis of BRICS. Now that BRICS is incorporating countries that are very different in terms of values, in terms of religious systems, in terms of political systems, like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt. This idea at the beginning should be advanced at its most. I mean, it should be considered. So BRICS countries need to be very sensitive to these issues and need to practice respect towards the difference between them. And if Brazil starts proclaiming the idea that IPSA is good because the countries are similar, and BRICS is not very good because they have differences and some issues are not fitted, I don't think that this is the right way to go. So it seems to me that this pro-IPSA discourse seems more like an escape route from BRICS than a bet on the way IPSA could work itself. So if Brazil is having second thoughts about BRICS grouping, this is creating problems. So Brazil proposed one kind of expansion, and its proposal was not considered. But there are other problems that are, I guess, more profound and very, very, very serious that Brazil is also creating to itself. Let me give you one example. Brazil has another inconsistency that harms the country's participation in the BRICS Plus format, and it refers to the appointment of key figures in the BRICS ecosystem. You know that the presidents of the new development bank is a rotative one. So you have at each 5 years, you have a member of one of the countries that is the president. And it is done, of course, through the indication of these countries, the appointment of these countries. So the last president that we had was very aligned to the US, President Jair Bolsonaro. And Brazil even became an extra European member or extra territorial member, I don't know how they call that, of NATO, which in Brazil, for the Brazilians had no meaning. And for the Brazilian diplomacy, they had to accept that because the former president wanted that. But, there's no implication in terms of Brazil having commitments with NATO. Nowadays, we're not talking about that anymore because the government is not aligned with the West in that way. But the former president appointed Marcos Troijo to be the Brazilian representative as the president of the New Development Bank. And Marcos Troijo was a very pro-Western liberal, which is a contradiction because the BRICS Bank originated from a structure that wants to, I won't say to confront Western institutions like the IMF, but wants to be an alternative to the policies of conditionality and the imposition of political values based on economic power. So the former president of Brazil had appointed Marcos Troijo, and now that Lula was re-elected, Lula appointed the former president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, as the president, and she is the president of the New Development Bank nowadays. Dilma Rousseff was the one that was at the presidency of Brazil in 2014, when at the summit in Brazil, the New Development Bank was launched. So it was seen by the BRICS partners as a very good gesture of the President Lula to show the importance that he was conferring to the New Development Bank. However, it was during Dilma Rousseff's government first term from 2011 to 2014 that Brazil started changing his foreign policy and starting a reapproachment with the United States and with the European Union, because the Brazilian foreign minister at that time, Antonio Patriota, thought that Brazil was too close to Russia and too close to China inside BRICS, and he wanted to rebalance these relations. Well, it turns out that Dilma Rousseff found out that the United States were spying on her, and so they had recorded phone conversations. I don't know if you remember that or if you have ever studied that moment in diplomacy, that Germany, Angela Merkel and Dilma Rousseff, they had phone conversations recorded, and the Americans were very interested in knowing about how would be the Brazilian policy in terms of energy supplies with our oil company, Petrobras. And so Dilma Rousseff, that was promoting this reapproachment with the United States, was very mad at Obama and said that she wouldn't talk to Obama anymore until Obama apologized to her for doing that. Of course, Obama didn't apologize. Obama didn't apologize to Germany, and he wouldn't apologize to Brazil because the United States is a superpower. And so Brazil became adrift. Brazilian diplomacy had a plan to rebalance the relations within BRICS because of the importance of Russia and China, with this reapproaching the United States. And then when we're going towards the United States direction, our president had a problem with the president of the United States, and so we stayed adrift in the middle without going nowhere. So this is a problem to me, that she is now at the presence of the BRICS Bank, although she's doing a very good job. But there's another problem, and this is more in terms of the negotiating process of enlargement. During Dilma Rousseff's term as president, Brazilian diplomacy passed through a crisis that resulted in the dismissal of the foreign ministry, Antonio Patriota. The crisis happened in Bolivia, La Paz, where the Brazilian embassy had accepted a senator from the opposition in the Bolivian state as a refugee. He entered into the embassy to ask for asylum, and Brazil conferred asylum to him, because otherwise he would be put in jail by Evo Morales, the president of Bolivia, and the justice system of Bolivia, because he was being accused of corruption. So this senator spent months inside the Brazilian embassy, and he was telling everyone that he would commit suicide. So without the authorization of the Brazilian diplomacy or of the Brazilian government, one diplomat that was in charge of the embassy put this senator in his car, the car of the embassy, and drove 22 hours towards the Brazilian frontier with Bolivia. And there was a Brazilian senator with a private jet that took him, the senator and the diplomat, and took them to the capital of Brazil and presented this senator as someone that was freed by Brazilian diplomacy, because this senator didn't have the permission to leave the Brazilian embassy in La Paz, because even though he was accepted by Brazil as an asylum seeker, the government of Bolivia did not recognize that at the moment. And so that was a huge crisis, because a diplomat took an action of such an importance that could affect the relations between these two countries. And the Brazilian diplomacy was not aware, the Brazilian government was not aware, and Dilma Rousseff, the president herself, knew that through the news when everything had happened. So it was a crisis. The foreign minister was fired by Dilma Rousseff. And then after there was a administrative procedure against this diplomat, and he received a penalty of 20 days without working, but receiving his salary. It's a very good in Brazil, public service. It happens sometimes when we commit a minor misconduct, we still receiving our salaries, and we don't need to work. So that's a different thing in terms of cultural aspects. But anyways, so it happens that today this diplomat is the Brazilian Sherpa at the BRICS. You mean what a Sherpa is? Is the one that is the one in charge of the whole negotiation with the BRICS, and is the one for whom all diplomats involved in that should report. And he's going to report directly to the foreign ministry. And he was the one that had the idea of negotiating or having these criterias together, of course, with the foreign ministry, for entrance in the BRICS that were not accepted and that were not put in practice in the last South Africa summit. And to make things worse, 2023, when Dilma Rousseff, as the president of New Development Bank, was attending the BRICS summit, they were at the hotel, and so they went to the lift, the elevator, the lift of the hotel, and Dilma Rousseff found this diplomat. And she recognized him because she was the one responsible for a crisis in her government, and a bilateral crisis with Bolivia, which is an important commercial partner of Brazil. So Dilma Rousseff reported that to the current president of Brazil, Lula da Silva. They're very good friends. And she said, you know, I don't want this diplomat to be the Sherpa negotiating BRICS while I am the president of the BRICS Development Bank. So she asked Lula to fire the diplomat. But Lula did not fire him. And he is still being the Sherpa. So I cannot imagine such a situation coming from other partners in BRICS. We have two very important persons involved in the BRICS process. Of course, the New Development Bank is an autonomous structure compared to the political process of BRICS. But you should create a good environment of trust between those that belong to the same country and are involved in the same project. So it does not make sense to me, unless Brazil is not really paying attention to what's happening at the BRICS, or even if there are some people involved in the process that are not considering that as a viable alternative nowadays. So these inconsistencies suggest that Brazil, despite the competence of its diplomacy, is confused in relation to BRICS. The fact that the Biden administration contribute decisively to the maintenance of Lula da Silva in power after the failed coup attempt attributed to the former President Jair Bolsonaro must also be considered. I don't know if you're aware of that, but there are many judicial procedures nowadays in Brazil against the former president because he asked the chiefs of the army, of the navy, and of the airspace force of Brazil to support him in a coup after Lula won the election last year in 2022. So the judiciary in Brazil found out that, and so now they are prosecuting the former president. And while that was happening, that was the second half of 2022, Antony Blinken from the United States came to Brazil. The CIA chief came to Brazil, and many other high-ranking diplomats came to Brazil to talk directly to the military in Brazil, saying that the United States wouldn't support such a coup, and that they were disencouraged to go through that venue. So Lula da Silva knows that, and some analysts identify that as a debt that the actual government of Brazil have with the United States and Europe. So that would explain why the relation between Brazil and Europe is becoming stronger, why the relation between Brazil, Russia, and China is not advancing. And I can feel that when I talk to diplomats and when I ask what's going on. So nobody knows exactly what's happening because Brazil is not profiting the way it could profit from the BRICS. So there is this indecision, and there are pressures. There are pressures from all sides against the Brazilian participation in the BRICS and against the Brazilian role as a possible mediator between the crisis of China and Russia and the West. So Lula wants BRICS to be strengthened, but he is in debt to the US and some European countries for guaranteeing him in office and does not intend to jeopardize the relations with them, not at least until the justice concludes the judgment of the former president. Meanwhile, the option for disengagement from BRICS is gaining adherence among Brazilian diplomats, as I mentioned before, and is being actively promoted by sectors of Brazilian organized civil society, especially those NGOs and think tanks that receive financial support from European and American institutions, as European and American governments do as business as usual. So the engagement of these sectors in the G20 events during Brazil's presidency, which is in this year, and there are many debates of civil society concerning to the problems that the G20 is facing, and the lack of interest in the BRICS process during Russia's presidency, which is in 2024, and there are more than hundreds of events that Russia is organizing in the BRICS presidency, but the Brazilians are not participating that much on that. And this is, to me, a sign of alertness. And that is the sign that Brazilian diplomacy should change the way it is looking at the BRICS. That's why I mentioned that Brazil is at the crossroads. So there are two paths to go. Brazil should decide which one he's going to take. And I do believe that it's better taking the BRICS path. It's better straightening the relations with Russia, with China, and with all the new partners of BRICS to promote the restructuring of the international order that would attend Brazilian interests, and to promote the respect towards different cultures, different values, different political systems, and to abandon this idea that every whole planet should behave the way the West does, which is behind the process of European enlargement, which is behind the process of NATO enlargement, and everything that you as IR students are well aware of. So, and then that's my proposal. So in this complicated scenario, the best strategy is to appeal to the direct involvement, and this is something that I think it's feasible. Celso Amorim, which is the former Brazilian the former foreign minister of Brazil, and now he is the special advisor of international relations to President Lula. And he was one of the founding fathers of BRICS in 2005, 2006, 2007, before BRICS got this format with annual summits in Ekaterinburg in 2009. So during the events of the General Assembly at the United Nations in September, Celso Amorim and Sergei Lavrov started talking about the possibility of creating a political group named BRICS, because this label was already very famous due to the report of Jim O'Neill of Goldman Sachs about which countries would benefit or would develop faster than other countries in the future. You know that this acronym came from the market and then became a political organization due to the efforts of Celso Amorim and Sergei Lavrov. These two countries, Brazil and Russia, were very important at the beginning of BRICS. China was very reluctant by that time. Nowadays, China is very engaged in the process. South Africa and India were like, okay, India was okay at the beginning, South Africa came later in 2010, but Brazil and Russia were the most important actors. So we need to ask to the Brazilian current advisor for international affairs of the presidency, Celso Amorim, that was involved in the process, that is a very good diplomat, very experienced diplomat, and respected by all countries that belong to BRICS, that he gets involved with this process. I would even suggest that Brazil should create a task force, BRICS task force, with Celso Amorim as the head, and many other diplomats working towards the improvement of Brazilian relations inside BRICS, and the adjustment of what are the demands that Brazil have and what could be offered by the other partners. For instance, if the BRICS, now in this enlarged format with 10 members, could assure that they are going to be proactive in the way negotiations concerning the restructuring of the Security Council of the United Nations are happening, and that they support Brazil, India, and South Africa as permanent members, and they create a venue for negotiation with the other permanent members, which Brazil has also good relations. I do think that this could be a very attractive offering for Brazil to opt for the BRICS path. So otherwise, I don't see Brazil in this enlarged process intensifying its participation in the group. Brazil needs to create a proper structure to handle BRICS. Otherwise, we're going to miss that opportunity. So this is my take on the way I see Brazilian participation in the enlargement process. I'm criticizing here some decisions that are happening, okay? I'm not criticizing at the whole the Brazilian diplomacy, because I know Brazilian diplomats and the world knows Brazilian diplomats, and they were one of the best in the world. So, and I'm not saying that just because my country, they represent my interest, but because they really are. If you had I guess last year, Baiana Soares, our ambassador in Russia, went to your university to deliver a speech about BRICS. And he's a very important figure at the Brazilian diplomacy, and I respect him very much. And he's doing a great job there with the other 10 or 11 diplomats that are serving at the Brazilian embassy in Moscow. They're doing a great job to put our countries together, to intensify the bilateral cooperation in different spheres. For instance, universities, it's going to be a meeting of rectors of Brazilian universities and Russian universities in October, which is going to be very important. I guess Samara University is going to participate in that, so that we can improve our collaborating venues. So Brazilian diplomats and Brazilian diplomacy is very good, above the average in terms of internationally accepted standards. But we need to take political decisions, and political decisions are not taken by diplomats. They are taken by the leaders. So this is an urge for the Brazilian leadership to consider BRICS as the best alternative that we have now to achieve our interests in the future. So that's my take. Thank you very much. And I'm really to hear your questions and to engage in the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this wonderful lecture. Well, I am sure that our students have some question for you. Well, I see the hands.
Thank you for your speech. My name is Denis. I'm a student of this university. And my question concerns the consequences of Argentina's refusal to join BRICS. So has this had any impact on relations between Brazil and Argentina? And do you think that the relations between these countries have deteriorated? Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dennis, for your question. Well, I think Argentina has deteriorated itself, not the relations between Brazil and Argentina. So this is a very, very interesting situation in Argentina because they choose a president that have many intriguing perspectives on world affairs. I don't know if you're aware of that, but last week when Iran responded to the attack of Israel to its embassy in Damascus, we saw all those drones this week. We saw all these drones being intercepted, and there are rumors about negotiations that happened before that happening there. So Milei, the president of Argentina, called all his cabinet to have a meeting on the Third World War. So he had that. And Argentinian specialists and IR scholars were like, oh my goodness, this guy doesn't know anything about what's happening. So they thought that the Third World War would have started 2 days ago. So if they're looking at the world with such a perspective, everything that they're going to do is not easy to understand. So for Brazilian diplomacy and for Brazilian interests, it was, I would say, very good that Argentina didn't get in BRICS, because we're still being the only representative of the region in this forum. That's power politics. And Brazil was very eager to put Argentina inside BRICS, because Brazil wanted to do that to somehow help the former government of Argentina that was facing difficulties in terms of the negotiation of the debt with the IMF. IMF didn't want to lend money to Argentina. And then Argentina asked for the help of Brazil, and Brazil wanted to advance that at the BRICS structure, so that the money that China offered to help Argentina would be channeled through BRICS to Argentina. And so Brazil was trying to help Argentina to get Argentina in BRICS. But the population in Argentina, for many different reasons, and I guess that the polarization of society, the fake news strategies that are happening in social medias, everything contribute to Milei to be elected president. And he is a president that has Brazil as the main trade partner, which is Brazil is very important to the Argentinian economy. And during the elections, he was calling the Brazilian president a thief. So, of course, the Brazilian president didn't go to the ceremony when he took office, because he was not respecting the Brazilian presidency and the Brazilian president Lula da Silva. And now, to make things even more complicated, he received Zelensky in Buenos Aires during the ceremony, because he is completely aligned with NATO, completely aligned with Europe. And now he is a Catholic that criticized the Pope, and he's trying to convert to Judaism, because there's this proximity here in South America between Pentecostal evangelicals and Israel and Jews, for political reasons. And you know, at the top of that, he is the one that when he delivers speeches in front of the audience, of the auditorium, there are always 4 or 5 chairs that are empty. And you know why? Because he believes that that's so weird. So he believes that the dogs that he had that had already passed away could be there in spirit to help him with the audience. I don't think this is a question for diplomacy. This is a question for a psychiatrist. So, you know, the relations between Brazil and Argentina are way more strong than the relations between the presidents, because the presidents, they change, but the states, they become, and we are neighbors to Argentina, and we're going to be neighbors forever with Argentina. I hope so. So if it's deteriorating, I guess Argentina is deteriorating itself, not the Brazil relations with Argentina. So that's my view. Of course, this is my view as a scholar and as someone that lives close to Argentina, that loves Argentina, that admires Messi as a soccer player, that admires Maradona as a soccer player, that loves Argentinian wines. And so I'm called a gaucho. Those Brazilians that live in the border are gauchos, like the Argentinians and the Uruguayans are. So if I take my car, in 8 hours, I am in Buenos Aires, which is the capital. And it takes me like 15 hours to get to Brasilia, which is the capital of Brazil. So I'm closer to Argentina than to the Brazilian central states. I have a profound respect for Argentinians and for the Argentina, but no, I don't think that he's going to be a good leader if he keeps doing these choices that he's doing.
Thank you very much for this full answer. I think that's one more question for you.
Well, good morning, respected Fabiano Mельничук. My name is Yaroslav. I am a student in this university too. We have of diplomatic union like BRICS, yeah, but sometimes we see news or comment people in internet what diplomatic relations in these unions have a regress like NATO. But what you can see relations diplomatic in BRICS. Brazil and Russia have a good partner, but what we can all BRICS relation diplomatic. And two questions. We have one question of Argentina. What Argentina close invade in BRICS? But what you think? What Argentina wanna join in NATO?
Well, relations between BRICS, amongst the BRICS countries, yeah. Brazil and Russia, they have achieved $10 billion in terms of trade. This is one example that after the sanctions, the amount of trade, of dollars in trade increased. That's interesting. And despite all the difficulties that Brazil had to buy fuel from Russia, fertilizers from Russia, Brazilian diplomacy there in Moscow managed to find ways to make products from Russia get in Brazil. Okay, but we have a problem with Russia now in terms of trade, talking in terms of bilateral relations, because Russia used to buy Brazilian meat, beef, Brazilian chicken, and Brazilian pork. And since 2014, Russia is passing through a very interesting transformation that it's producing these goods instead of buying from Brazil. Because Russia playing its self-sufficiency in terms of food security, because Russia knew what would happen in the future. And I'm talking to you that this movement is started in 2014. And we know what happened in 2014 after the Maidan and after the crisis in Crimea and Ukraine, the ousting of Yanukovych, and so on and so forth. So this is a problem. And now Russia buys products from Brazil, and Russia aggregate value in these products and sell them to China. In terms of beef, for instance, Russia is doing that, which is not good for Brazil, of course, because you don't have industrialized products have more aggregate value than those in natura. So this is one thing that's happening, and I guess the commercial relation, the trade relations between Brazil and Russia should be worked in that direction to create more interdependency. But there are many other areas that are very interesting to Brazil that involve high technology, that involve expert cooperation in physics, in engineering, in electronics, and spatial technology, military technology, that unfortunately Brazil is suffering pressure from the Western partners not to engage with Russia. So that would be very good to Brazil. Brazil has no Nobel Prize, and there's one institute in Russia that has 7 in one institute in Moscow. So just think about how we could profit with this exchange of knowledge, expertise, and technological related issues. So this is one thing. Talking about the other countries, but there are at the BRICS format, we have the meetings of ministers of specific sectors. So if you go to the Russian presidency website of BRICS 2024, just Google it and you're going to find it, or Yandex it, sorry, Yandex it, and you're going to find it, that we have meetings with health ministers, with sports ministers, with culture ministers, with financial ministers, with agricultural ministers, with defense ministers, foreign ministers. And so there is an ongoing process of increasing the bilateral cooperation intra-BRICS bloc, which has resulted in very interesting cooperation agreements. For instance, in terms of vaccines against COVID, all the BRICS countries created a dialogue and created a mechanism to share technology to produce them, which is very good for the countries. So, and it happened. So it's impossible to explain everything that's happening. And I'm pretty sure that even those leaders of these countries, they have no idea what's happening at this specific level, because, you know, the bureaucracy at the ministries and the foreign offices of these countries are working on that on a weekly basis during the whole year. So go to the website of Russian presidency at BRICS this year and check the agenda. I asked one of my students that work with me in the research project on BRICS to organize an Excel sheet to put that there. It's like hundreds and hundreds of events this year. And we are at the beginning of the year, we're in April. So until the summit that's going to take place in Kazan in October with the leaders of all countries, many things are going to happen. So this is for me, this is a very interesting format of cooperation, and that shows progress, that countries are profiting with that. So, but then if you want to see bilaterally, you need to check. Of course, China is the second best or second largest economy in the world in power purchase. It is the first already, and of course there's no equilibrium, or it's not balanced, the relations of China with the other partners. But the relations of China with the whole world is not balanced. So it's not a problem of BRICS. It's something very good for China that China developed like this. But if you take specifically Russia and China, I guess you have more than $200 billion of trade. Brazil and Russia, $10 billion. Brazil and China, I guess it goes, it increases a lot. But there's this imbalance, of course, and you can understand that through the situation of the world that changed a lot since 2022 with the special military operation and the sanctions and all the concealment culture against Russia and Russians and Russian culture and Russian everything. And China is offering support to Russia in that sense. So the second one, about Argentina getting into NATO. You know that during the First World War, I mean, not First World, sorry, the First Gulf War, 1991, Argentina sent a ship of his soldiers to go to fight in Iraq to support NATO. But NATO had not demanded that. They did that because they wanted to offer their services. And I'm not sure if they get there in time to engage in actual conflict. So just for you to see that this idea of Argentina becoming a part of NATO is a way that some political elites in Argentina have to demonstrate that they adore the West, that they consider themselves as being Westerners, liberals. But there are a large part of the population in Argentina that do not see them like this. They see them as Latino-Americanos, like we are. So we are the result of the colonization process of the Europeans against the original peoples that lived here in South America. And we are a very culturally diverse society with very, very huge problems in terms of the distribution of income and poverty and violence, because the state that was created in South America was the one to explore the peoples that lived in South America, not to create the atmosphere for a good life. Like, for instance, you have the state in Russia or in other countries in Europe. So this is not unanimous in Argentine society. This is a political move of the president to tell to the West that, you know, we are going to be your partners because we identify with you. We want to be like you. Argentina has 35 million people. Brazil has 210 million people in terms of population. The territory of Brazil is 5 times the size of territory of Argentina. I guess 4 times. Brazil is the 5th in terms of territory. And so if they can behave like this, telling the West that the West should teach them how to be, that's okay for them. But Brazil won't do that, because naturally Brazil is stronger and bigger and has its own interests in the international arena. This is again what I have to tell you about Argentina, but with this remark that I love Argentina culture, I love Argentina wine, I love Argentinians, I like Argentina soccer players, okay? And we are good neighbors, but you know, sometimes they make choices, we need to respect these choices, but we don't need to agree with these choices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One more question. Thank you for your speech. My name is Yulia, and I'm also a student here in this university. So my question is actually regarding Brazil, which is, what are the strategic purposes, yes, that Brazil is pursuing by participating in BRICS? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yulia. Thank you very much for your question. At the beginning, as I mentioned in my presentation, it was the Security Council permanent seat. That was a strategic goal that Brazil had, and that goal was established at the end of the 90s during the presidency of Fernando Henrique Cardoso and during the foreign ministership of Luis Felipe Lampreia, which was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Brazil. So for that, Brazil even participated in the beginning of the middle of the 90s of a group that was known as the G4. The G4 was composed by Brazil, India, Japan, and Germany. These 4 countries created this dialogue mechanism in the 90s because they wanted to become permanent members of the Security Council. What happened during the 90s? Brazil passed through a very liberal moment in its economy and political values. Brazil had problems with the promise of the liberal institutions that if Brazil started privatizing, if Brazil started liberalizing its economy, Brazil would receive at the international level the support for the export of its goods, for the participation in international forums, and for being an actor with a role in these forums. So In that context, Brazil aligned with India, Germany, and Japan. But at the end of the 90s, Brazil realized that the liberal promise was a false one. In terms of trade negotiations, we were passing through the moment after the creation of the World Trade Organization. We had very harsh discussions. It was 94, 95, very harsh discussions because developing countries, they accepted and they supported the creation of the World Trade Organization because rich countries promised them that the first issue that would be put in the agenda would be the liberation of the markets of developing countries for goods coming from developing. But then during the negotiation process, what happened? Developed countries start saying that they wanted to negotiate property rights, that they want to negotiate services, because their economies have changed in the previous years, I mean decades, and now their GDPs are basically of services and property rights, not trade in goods. Developing countries that are poor, they sell goods and they get revenue from that, and they need that money to have policies of income distribution, of public health, of public education. And so we at the south of the globe wanted to have access to European and American markets, but they did not open the access, and they wanted to impose restrictions on property rights and services, because that's what they're selling in the world now. So that created an impasse during these trade negotiations. I'm giving one example, okay, but there are other examples. IMF, World Bank, the idea that you have the rich countries that can decide who is going to receive the money and how the money is going to be applied. And they even ask conditionality. They even have these conditionality policies that they order you to change the way you structure your economy. So if you have a population in a Southern American country that elected a president that wants to protect the economy, that the state have an important role in regulating the economy, you try to get money from the IMF, they would say, no, state should not intervene. Open your markets for for developed multinationals from developed countries. So we had all these impasses, all these problems happening during the 90s. And at the end of the 90s, then Brazil realized that, this idea of an international liberal order was just a promise, but the rich countries did not respect that and did not accomplish what they promised. So then Brazil started engaging in a dialogue with India and South Africa, which is the IPSA that I mentioned. And in 2001, 2002, Brazil engaged in this dialogue and created this mechanism, IPSA, abandoning Germany and Japan. And after that, Brazil engaged because he saw that it was not sufficient to have the support necessary to become a permanent member of the Security Council. Then Brazil started engaging the BRICS process. So you see there's a transformation of Brazilian position from a pro-liberal order in the 90s to a more contestatory order and a multipolar order and a more developmentalist order until today. That's why I think that Brazil is at the crossroads. So the Security Council is very important because once a country belongs to the Security Council, there are many other side issues that can be negotiated, and Brazil would have more power to negotiate it than negotiating a veto power that Brazil would have. That's how it works. For instance, when you have when someone calls for a vote on a resolution at Security Council, the diplomats, they negotiate, and there are things that are not overtly, I would say, on the table, in the negotiating table, but there are things that are discussed closed doors that countries assume compromises in doing if they can align a favorable vote for their interests. So this is the kind of power that Brazil would have.
Wow. Thank you very much. Well, Unfortunately, we have really tight deadline at our conference. So we can, we want to say you thank you very much. As for me, and I think as everyone in this class, I am really delighted by your lecture. Your English accent, it was really wonderful for me. Well, yes. And it's a great honor to listen to you for us, and it would be a great honor if you maybe will participate in our next events if you have time. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you very much. Большое спасибо.